Okay, I've set it up. Okay, so we can continue with Electric Circus. That was one of my questions, how you ended up at Electric Circus and how you became, if I'm not mistaken, a consulting psychologist, which is an extraordinary role at the venue level.
Okay. So what was that? Okay. What did you just say?
So how you ended up at Electric Circus and how you became a consulting psychologist?
That's what I'm going to tell you. Okay. So we had to get there, and it was I think it was a Sunday in August. I think it was around August 16th. And so we went over, and there was the mothers of invention were being, they were being, there was a session where they were trying out in the circus. And the circus was an old uh, public community house building that had a very large auditorium that Jerry Brandt and his colleague had set up as a tent inside this Polish community house. So that's why. And then, of course, they had Mort Subotnick and Tony Martin were the the music light show thing. And then they were interviewing the mothers of invention that afternoon, and it was a free opening, so everybody could come in. And so my girlfriend and I walked in, and of course, this was the first time I had heard a really disco um, of such high quality, because what Mort Subotnick was doing was having some of his music mixed in with Bach and Brahms. There would be Bach, some portions of Bach and some portion of Brahms. And Tony Martin was having a light show all over the canvas of the circus. That was, and then there were, of course, uh, um, uh, lots of youth out on the floor dancing and doing their thing, and it was quite something. And it suddenly struck me, and this is very important. In my undergraduate at Colorado College, I had taken a course on the history of music, and I was especially taken with medieval, the formation of medieval music, and in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, and in the era that fascinated me was the era in the late 1100s and first half of the 1200s. And during that time, the Mass was celebrated in a much more festive way. There was the introductus, in which the priests would come in down the aisle, and they would be having, and they'd be having drums and flares and dancing. They would dance down the aisles, and this was the intros. And I was just, and then I was studying with Willie Apple at that time, who was the great authority on medieval music and so and he was very, very, he played some songs of Perotinus and Leoninus. These were the composers at that time in the cathedral, and I was very intrigued with it. But there in the circus, I saw this parade of and mixture of songs and so forth, and it struck me that this was a modern day version of the introduction processions in the Cathedral Notre Dame. Now, my friend at that time, who had been one of my instructors in Colorado College, was a man by the name of John Reeves White. And he was at that time, he had long after I'd been at Colorado College. He had gotten to the University of Indiana and gotten his PhD in musicology, and had formed a troupe that was playing medieval music and early Renaissance. And in New York City, he was the head of the New York Pro Musica Antiqua. And we were still friends from Colorado College days. So after that experience in Colorado College, after that experience in the Electric Circus, I went to John's. I called him up and says, I have to meet with you. I said, I've had this wonderful experience, and it's reminded me of the events in the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and it's given me the idea that you and the Pro Musica Antiqua should join up with the Electric Circus and do a show in the Electric Circus with all this rigor and all this dancing and light shows and so forth. And he said, well, that's a great idea, but it's your idea, so why don't you go to the manager, if you can get to the managers of the Electric Circus, and see if they would be interested in that. I says, me? And he said, yes. So I was only 2 years on the faculty at NYU at that time. I was still, kind of timid, but I went over there again, and it took some bravery, but on one, I went into the buildings several times and backed out, and then finally there was a staircase that I had gone up where the manager's offices were, and I was gotten timid again and was coming on the way down when man whose last name was Wright was coming up. I didn't know who he was, and he says, it was about noon on a weekday, and he says, can I help you? I says, well, I'm trying to reach someone that's is in charge of the Electric Circus. And he says, well, and I said, what do you mean? Well, I am. What's your business? So I told him about my vision and about the head of the Pro Musica Antiquas being thought it was a good idea, and they'd put me in charge. And he says, that is a great idea indeed. Give me his name. We would love to set up a program that would combine, all that goes on in the Electric Circus with this medieval music issues. So it started, and they got together. The head of the from Musica Antiqua, and Dennis Wright, and Jerry Brandt, and so forth, and they set up so that by Christmas holidays, when the youth were coming back from colleges, they were going to have a program that combined the Electric Circus and Mort Subotnick and you know the whole, Terry, and so the concert was set in the during the holiday week. So, but John White already had something scheduled at the Carnegie Hall, and he thought that this maybe the concert at the Electric Circus would be a conflict. So he called up a man by the name of Schutz and said, I just want to see if it's okay. We have although we have a concert of our medieval music scheduled at Carnegie Hall, just a few days before, we have a concert at the Electric Circus. And he says, oh, really? He says, I'll tell you what, we won't bother about your medieval music concert. We will simply move the concert that's being planned for the Electric Circus. We're going to have it in Carnegie Hall. It will be called the Electric Christmas. So that was the beginning of what then turned out to be it was something that the circus was quite excited about, because it was giving them a different characterization. They weren't just a disco; they were doing something culturally significant. And so during the Christmas week of 1967, the Electric Christmas was a program that went on for 2 days. There were 2 sessions of it at Carnegie Hall, and it was quite amazing, and and one of the New York Times reporters, Eric Saltzman, came to the concert, and a few days later, he wrote a very major article for the New York Times called "A New Age is Coming," and it got into Time magazine. And so I mentioned Eric Saltzman, and you said you didn't know about him, but now I'm telling you, he was a musician who was a music reporter for the New York Times, and his article was it was a Sunday full page, couple page article, major, and Time magazine picked up on it, and so it got and it got the article got reported at the same time that the singer Aretha that you were who just died recently. So we were on the same page, and so it was the beginning, and then the Electric Circus, Jerry Brandt was just, he was extremely pleased over the turn of events, of course. It was great advertisement for the Electric Circus. So he invited me to organize a show called the Electric Easter, and that was for the Easter week in 1968. And I got, and now during all this time, of course, I was aware of David Rosenboom because he was, that he had originally uh, been a student at the University of Illinois in their music, program, which
Was a composition
with
student, right?
with Lahar and Hiller and Martirano and then so Lahar and Hiller had gotten an offer to join the music faculty at the University of New York in Buffalo. And he said, well, he invited David Rosenboom, who was still an undergraduate, to come with him to help him set up the music, the computerized version. And so David didn't finish his undergraduate degree because this was just too important. It was a beginning of a career. So he followed Lahar and Hiller to the State University of New York at Buffalo. And then that's when Mort and Tony were commissioned to come to NYU and to the Electric Circus. They invited David Rosenboom to come and help them with the computer side of things. Are you following me?
Yes, they're just, I mean, those are not important really, but a couple of factual corrections. Jerry Hiller, he came later than David to Buffalo. David was invited by Lucas Foss, who attended the festival in Illinois in '67. So David left to become a creative associate at Buffalo with Lucas Foss, and Ledger and Hiller, he came a year after. And I think sometime in '68, David left Buffalo and moved to New York, sort of to
but he was there. Let's see. I'm trying to. He could have been in 1967. I'm trying to. I thought he was already helping Mort at least by December of 1967. I thought he was already at the Electric Circus.
No, I think so. He should be joining Buffalo in fall of '67, and he was there maybe till fall of '68, and then he left for New York, sort of for I don't know, as a career development for opportunities with his group, experimental rock, whatever, called Time. And they should be performing at Electric Circus as a group. too. And I think he was leaving actually as he was invited to Electric Circus, so he wasn't moving to New York from Buffalo without any.
Well, he was. I'm sure he came down. It it was it would have been Mort and Tony that would have arranged for him to join them,
Mhm.
and he was. And maybe he wasn't there in 1967 because for sure I know that he performed at the Electric Ear,
Mhm.
and I'm responsible for the Electric Ear occurring also because the success of the Electric Christmas uh, called one of when I was at the Yale Music School, there was a young woman there by the name of Thais Latham. She was and she was at the music school, and she was working with David Cranbuell and me on the reward uh, information reward that we had had devised, and she had been in she had her career taken her to England. Her husband was a Rockefeller researcher in England, and then they'd come back, and in 1968, I got I got contacted by her it would have been around about uh, February of 1968, and she said, "Oh, do you remember me? I was at Yale, and I was working with David Cranbuell's David Cranbuell and your information system, and you helped me. But I'm here, and now I'm back from experience at the American Embassy vis-a-vis music in England. But I'm back here now, and I'm formed. I'm helping Judy Blinken, whose husband was in the government at Hunter College. But I see that you're very involved with the Electric Circus, and could I have lunch with you? And I said, well, sure. So Thais and I had lunch, and she was hearing that there was a preparation for the Electric Easter, and I said, would you like to see what goes on at the Electric Circus? And she said, yes. I says, well, come with me, and I will show you the Electric Circus. And she said, this would be a great place to have a music series. Can you introduce me to the owners? And I said, oh, yes, I can. And so it was by the, I'm not quite sure about the dates, but I think it'd be June of 1968. The Electric Ear had been formed, and and they so the concert series went on, and there is, I know for certainty that David David Rosenboom was not, he was working at, by that time was helping Mort with the computer side of the Electric Circus, and he, Thais Latham, scheduled him for one of the shows. And it was the performance was called Think Dog.
Yes.
And so this was, and so it was, it was a very, and then he he did some other things too, but so I became aware of him, and then the Electric Ear program was a major one that went on all during the fall of 1968, and then also in the spring of 1969. And I got, I I was I Thais was with some help from Mort Subotnick was scheduling the important each Monday night. The circus agreed to turn over the circus entirely to a single composer uh, who could use the whole evening to set up a multimedia show. And there were, and there were just major displays. Martirano did,
LCJ.
yeah, LBJ,
LCJ.
and there's Laharn Hiller came, and a whole slew, and it was a major, absolutely major display of the multimedia, um, and the New York Times was extremely enthusiastic, and I have all of the programs, all of the reviews. I have them in my on my computer.
Mm-hmm.
I bet you don't.
I've shared, I think, the Google folder. There are many reviews. I'm not sure that I have as
Yeah,
many as you do.
and I may have given them to David, and you may have gotten them from David.
Mm-hmm.
But I have them all, and they go for the Electric Circus, the Electric Ear, and the Intermedia that followed it at
I
Automation House.
Yes, I think I have very little for Automation House and Intermediate series there, but I have in the archive of David, there is this the Electric Ear kind of compilation that, as far as I recall, Thais Latham put together, and they're basically all the programs for the series.
They probably got from me or from Thais. I suspect I have the. So at any rate, then the so I with Think Dog and some um, uh, some other work that David was doing, I got I got very, and I knew he was very skilled on the computer technologies involved with music. So I was scheduled to give a talk out at the State University of New York in Stony Brook, and I went out there, and there was a a psychologist there that introduced himself as Les Femi.
Mm-hmm.
And Les, after my talk, he said, "Why don't you come to my lab? I'm doing some EEG work." And I know that there's some thought that there's through biofeedback that one might be able to learn to control your own EEG. Would you like to be hooked up? So I was hooked up, and if you and it looked like I was having some success in being able to 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 to
Control the
get
output.
various and I immediately saw this was something. I had a dream actually that I could, if this technology really worked, that I could set up a concert at Carnegie Hall, and on the stage would be one chair, and I would walk out all hooked up with recording electrodes. I would sit in the chair, and through interface with computers, I could sit there and produce a concert on stage just by thinking of it. But I knew I wasn't the person to do it. So I went to David. I said, can you come out with me to
Mm-hmm.
Stony Brook? I want to introduce you to someone that I think you may be able to make use of the technology. I want you to meet Les Femi. Well, they hit it off. And then David took it. And of course, as we know, he ran with it. But in the meantime, he was he'd gotten very enthused about the biofeedback, not only about the technology, but about its how maybe he should become get a PhD in biofeedback himself in our department. The problem was he didn't even have a undergraduate degree.
Yes.
And we had to go up through the Board of Regents and do a lot of things. But finally, because he had a great career record, the Board of Regents finally agreed that to give him an exception where he could apply for graduate school standing at NYU. And so who was he going to work with? Well, it was Lloyd Kaufman. And so he started I'm guessing the time would be about 1971, maybe. I may be a year off, but he started in as a graduate student in the psychology department, working with Lloyd Kaufman. And of course, there's the regimens of, especially for the first few years, they're very tight, and you have a lot of requirements and courses and things you have to do. And so by I would say by early November, and you may have it possibly, David. We David and I had lunch, and David said, "Ted, I'm very puzzled. Music has been so much a part of my life, and the regimen of going through all the things for graduate school is taking away, and I'm not being able to fully perform anymore, and I'm beginning to have psychosomatic symptoms, headaches and stomach and so forth. And I said, David, absolutely, your body is trying to tell you that that you should drop out of of graduate school immediately. I said, and don't feel that I will think that you have, abandoned what you were thought that I was helping you with. It's absolutely essential that you follow through with this. So, and Lord Kaufman agreed. He said, "Okay, I understand," and it's not something that it's a and so David continued a little bit working on some of the computer programs that he was with music, but then he got an offer to go up to Toronto, and he and Jackie Humbert, that was his. I guess they were married. I'm not sure.
No, they met in Toronto. She was a student. That was
Is
later.
that right? Okay. All
Yes.
right. Well, that would be it. I know I met her up there because
Yeah.
David invited me up several times, and I'd go up. And Toronto was a great city, and
Hmm.
yes, and I met. Yes, that was where I met her. I didn't. Yes, you've got the data right, but that's so. I'm the I call myself the headwaters of the Nile for several things, because it was through 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 this going over and having this vision over at Electric Circus on a hot Sunday afternoon, and visited this a repeat of things that happened in the Cathedral of Notre Dame in the 12th century, and that was the beginning of a aspect of the electric circus that took off. And then the electric ear. I was again the interface that I introduced Thais to, and she, and so from that the electric ear started, and then of course I will, I'm sort of the starter aspect of what became the major event. Career of David Rosenboom, and here you are.
Yes, yes. Thank you for the narrative. If I may, could I ask just more specific kind of questions about the
Yeah,
detail of
sure.
these points? So, okay, we figured out how you ended up to be consulting psychologist at Electric Circus. Were you a part of a staff there? Like, were you employed? Did they pay money, or what was the affiliation with the venue?
What was the question again?
So, were you employed by Electric Circus as a consulting psychology? Was there any formal affiliation, or were you just kind of invited consultant?
With me?
Yes.
Oh, I, I didn't have a contractual relationship with them. It was not a contractual relationship on paper.
Mm-hmm.
and I never got paid for anything. But and that didn't matter to me. It was the important thing was it was happening. Now Jerry Brandt was, and you know he was very friendly with the yippies. Okay, and that's and he was a rascal, uh, but he was a Lower East Side brat. But he did have a soft heart and a soft spot in his heart for young, say, teenagers. And so he would open the circus up in Saturday afternoon, free of charge to the young people, high school or upper level grade school, to come in and celebrate in the circus. Um, and and he, of course, he knew that I'd been in the instigator of the Electric Christmas, and he had agreed to let me organize the programs for the Electric Easter. Of course, the Electric Easter turned out to be it happened right after Martin Luther King's assassination, and so the date was the whole city was in mourning. So although the concert went on, but so we had it was quite successful, but it it was sad and so forth. But and so I you know I but but he could be the he was he was a there were certain criminal elements to him, and so one evening we got into an argument over something, and he was trying to be too dictatorial. And in a moment of rage, I says, "You're nothing but a Napoleonic chicken shit." And he says, "Oh, I've never been." He broke into laughter, but he did take revenge because I was supposed to be credited with having formed the Electric Easter, and when it was finally the programs were printed, my name was out of it. And another reason was that David Cranbuell, who is writing the music for a lot of it, had an interview with the Times, and he thoughtlessly didn't mention the owners of the circus, and they were very annoyed over that. So there were some, mistakes made. But the Electric Ear was quite successful until finally they at the by the end of the spring of 1969, and I believe it was 69. I may be off. It may have been in the fall, but it didn't look like it was going to work to continue to have the Electric Ear at the circus. But Theodore Keel, who had the automation house up in the around the Park or just off of it, um, around the 69th Avenue. He invited Thais to move the electric ear up to Automation House. And that, but it changed its name to the Intermedia.
Mhm.
But there was about as significant a set of performers that were there too. And at one point, the major David did some of the beginnings of his brain EEG work there, and got a big write up in the Saturday Review, a Washington magazine, and there's there was just it was extremely interesting time, and but then what had happened at the circus was that while the circus originally had been seen as it did not have any alcohol.
Mhm.
Alcohol was not permitted, but some other substances were.
Of course.
And then there was a hoodlum element that began to be involved, and there was some, um, you know, some performances that went wrong, and it then they got quite. They finally had to close,
Mhm.
and it became seen as a drug scene, and
Right. Yeah, what you just said, it brings much clarity because in 69 and 70, David published a couple of they're more kind of publicist papers that are super critical about the electric circus, and he basically describes some sort of crisis,
that's right.
but does it in a very murky way that basically claims that, I mean, the venue isn't really interested in all this multi-inter blah 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 media, and but he doesn't get specific enough. From Morton Subotnick, I've learned that Tony Martin he left or something because of kind of disagreements with people there, and so soon Morton left and David as well. So yes, I guess that was kind of a gradual exit of everything experimental out of out of the venue.
Yeah, yes, it. So they were, they came to me to see if I had any thoughts about how they could could rectify things. Um, it but it just the besides the politics had changed in the country.
Ah.
Hubert Humphrey was had been running against Nixon, and he should have won, but for two things: um, uh, it, he wasn't supported by very well by the outgoing president, and then also the Chicago Democratic Convention, with the hippies heading it in ways, was was scandalous, and that turned some of the voters away from Hubert Humphrey. And Hubert was a very decent man in his own right. And I met him. Thais was a close friend of his. So on one of his tours, and he was staying up at the Waldorf, she said, "Come up with me. My friend Hubert is there, and he's willing to have a meeting, and I want to introduce you to Hubert Humphrey." So anyway, it was one of those side benefits of being associated with the Electric Circus. So they didn't. Uh, I don't know what their politics were about things, but except I know that the hippies were their friend. I met the head of the hippies too. It was a period in the 1960s. It was a period of great ferment, and much of it, and it started to, the racial issues that were being going on hot and heavy, and and finally being dealt with last. And so it was, but then with Nixon coming into the presidency, and things started, unfortunately. I mean, there were some things which Nixon was a crook, but he was a very smart man. And so he could do some things, like one of the things that probably you could say was a good thing is he was probably the only Republican that could have reestablished connections with Mao Zedong. And if the country, the Republicans would not have allowed a realignment with China, except that Nixon was for it. And that paved the way. And of course, it paved the way for Nixon in China, and an opera that is well known, and other things. And it was, but at any rate, the it was the 60s were very interesting, and lots of ferment and change and so forth. But then, there was one of the things that the Times said about the Electric Circus is the music reviewers would always look forward to reviewing the next person that was being shown at the Electric Ear, and they said, it's said our careers when we review a concert is always sitting in a seat in an auditorium, but at last we can get up and wander around. We don't have to. And so they were very enthusiastic about it, and there was Schoenberg and Strongen and a number of others that the reviewers were just uniformly. You could hardly, Tyson, after each Monday night, things would close down by around 11:30. That was the concert was over, and Titus and I would go to a night cafe and sit around until 2 or 2:30 when the New York Times would come out. in those days, a concert was reviewed if it occurred in the evening. It was reviewed in time to appear in the first edition of the next day's Times, and we would find some, and restaurants. New York was was stayed open all night in those days, and you could find some place always. So we would sit and we would wait because we were anxious to see what the reviewer would say about that concert. And honestly, the reviewers routinely gave the concerts better reviews than we did.
Yes.
So it was just amazing, and then it was, but then of course, then I was when, as you probably know, is that when biofeed when they really using the biofeedback methodologies for computerized performances, there was the Electrical Engineers of America conference in New York City, and David was in, so the biofeedback quartet performed. Do you know about
Yes,
that?
I was going to ask about it. That was for the portable gold and philosopher's stones for four people, but that was a bit later in time. I just if we may sort of push back and discuss more.
Well,
When you first visited the lab of Les Femi and you're describing that dream, have you heard by then of the work of Alvin Lucier and Richard Teitelbaum?
oh yes, I knew them. Yes. Oh
Okay.
yes, I knew most of David's friends at that time, and yes, um,
Yeah.
but the Biofeedback Quartet. Uh, I was a member of it for a while, but um, the problem was that I was never used to jamming with anybody. And the other three members have much more sensitive to each other, even in producing EEG. And so David suggested that maybe someone else should fill in for me. but but at any rate, there was at the engineering conference at that big conference sessions. He there was this. It was and then I'm blocking on the famous woman.
Katerina
Uh,
Krimsky.
uh, 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 say it again.
Oh yeah. So I think the others three members. I think David was also performing, if I'm not mistaken. So there should be also Katrina Krimsky, and I think the remaining participant, maybe JB Floyd. So I think they.
Uh, 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 just a second. I think I probably something. It was very famous. Yeah. It's a problem with I can't get at names as easily as I used to, and it was. Uh, she did a piece. let's see, I may have it just a second. It was one of the concerts. Oh well, let's not struggle about that right now. I can, but there were the piece called something at 20 paces. A guy, I'm blocking on the name of the piece, but bother. So so of course I did keep. Oh, there's one thing that at the end of one of the of the um, of the electric the electric Easter, electric Christmas, electric Easter um, um, thing that I have in my computer. At the end of it is an interview which Tice's son Niles did with Mort and Tony that date back to the formation of their procedures at the in California, and just a second here. The just a minute here. I'm trying to. I have some notes here that I have to. Okay. It was just I'm having. There was a before before um, Mort and Terry came to NYU. There was already a formation of a group in California, and it was.
Are you referring to San Francisco Tape Music Center?
That's right. Exactly what I'm referring to. Have you seen the interview?
I'm not sure which one you are referring to. If
Tice's son interviewed Tony and Mort.
No, I think I didn't see that one.
And I have it. And it will be very interesting. So actually, maybe if I can extract it, I will because it shows the beginning of their multimedia excursions um, before they came to New York City. and it's an interview that Tice's son did. Niles. He was he ended up being the Washington correspondent for the New York Post here in New York City, and quite good. But he had good interview techniques.
Yeah, nice. So another question before the premiere of Ecology of the Skin, the first Brainwave piece at Automation House on December 4th, if I'm not mistaken, there was a press conference with you, David Vanderkar, Lester Femi, and David, of course. Was it something, the press conference itself, did someone arrange it and like invited publicity, or just do you have any memory of that event?
I don't have an immediate memory of that. Now, I probably have it in my records, but I don't have it. But yeah, but there was a reporter by the name of I think Bruce Collier that did it for the. No, he wouldn't have been interviewed him, I don't think. There are things that what I would suggest is that maybe we should have another. You should ask me some questions. If I can't answer them, we should be back in touch later on.
Yes. Yes, sure.
Um, the I could the interview with that Tice's son did. I could attach to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
send it as an attachment. Okay.
Yes, sure.
Um, there's now, of course, there's a lot of interest right now going on in the in sort of in the computer and neuroscience aspects of music. And there's uh, there is a do you know the name Greg Braden?
Again.
He's a neuroscientist and musician
Mm-hmm.
that is very involved in the use of music as a corrective in our culture at the present time. He and a clinician by the name of Sue Morter.
Mm-hmm.
And what I will do, and it's I've just looked at a summit called Global Oneness Summit that is run by a person by the name of Adam Hall, and there's an amazing interview on it, and I can send you the link
Mm-hmm.
with these two people, Sue Morter and Greg Braden. So um, I'm not sure that would feed into what your interests are, but it would be, it's, in some ways, it's what um, is amazingly going on now is the interest in what are the intrinsic values of music. It turned, it appears that the long before we Homo sapiens had language, there was one way that we could, to some extent, communicate with each other in a tribal way that would align us as a tribe. And it looks like music may have been, music and rhythm may have been in some ways an initial communicative uh, uh, process by which members in a tribe could be bonded.
Mm-hmm.
And one, just has to know that there's been all kinds of, even in today's standing, there's wedding music, there's funeral music, there's various music for different societal functions, but it's the notion of a pattern and racial and are somehow extremely embedded in our makeup as humans.
Right.
And it's almost it feels like it may have been programmed, even genetically programmed into us to be very attentive to the elements of music. And even infants very early on show high attention, high attention issues to music and to dance and so forth. So I'm not sure how that fits into your project, but with David, but the issues are there. Is that there's that different aspects of music make up what we call not the quanta of our experiences, but the qualia of our experiences. And that it's, in a way, the qualia are the first labels for how we communicate to each other. And it's in it's just imagining many thousands of years ago, we were one of the problems about our personal experience is that it's very hard to we can't directly share personal experiences, not directly, but there's a way to do it, and one of them is through music.
Mm-hmm.
But in the art, in the visual aspect, you can imagine, in one of the caves in France, that someone discovers that they can draw a picture of a bull or a rhinoceros, and others, and others can relate to it in a way that suddenly strikes the creator as a way to communicate one's own personal response to these creatures to someone else. And therein lies the beginning of the creation of written language. It looks like Egyptian hieroglyphics are just they really are they're derived from the ways of portraying objects. And same thing with the Chinese too. The Chinese symbols have an ancient origin as portraits of what one is. So these are qualia aspects of things. And now, and of course, now we're trying to become more aware of where how these are represented within our and by our neurons, and the way they organize themselves. So, and David, of course, is he's one of the prime investigators of how pattern and organization is represented and reflected by brain patterns, rhythms, parts of the brain, and so forth. And he's in effect probably maybe one of the most investigatively knowledgeable people in this domain. I'm very impressed with what David has gone on to do, and I know that he's writing a book, and I'm sure you're somehow intimately involved in that.
That was an encouragement. Yeah, so with I will share questions, of course, but what immediately sort of I'm just curious to avoid asking, since you were a mentor of David from the point of his start with even before with the Brainwave music. So when he just came up with Ecology of the Skin and other Brainwave pieces, and he was in this music art community, and you were in like in the community of the real scientists in experimental psychology. So what was the reception of his work by your colleagues? Were they interested? Were they skeptical? Because there was...
Are you talking about other neuroscientists?
Yes, back in the early...
Well, there was there were quite a number of our faculty that were certainly went over to the Electric Circus, and of course they were exposed to David's work, and so the period was I mean so I'll just go back. When I first started to change my career from focusing upon the construction of music to its the feeling aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
It took me into psychology. Oh, when I before I met before I got had this interview with Neil Miller, I had gone over to the psychology department and was making some inquiries about whether there was any way in which I could participate. And the head of the department looked at me as like I must be looking for the nearest therapist. The idea that someone in music could be interested in science, and conversely, someone in science could be interested in music was well, fairly unthinkable at that time. So, and that's the way it persisted for quite a while. But there's been there in the last 20 years, it's in and not much before it, there has been an amazing thinking of the relationship between music and psychology. Now it's one of the major fields of research in psychology and neuroscience. Oh, you cannot, it's a flood of papers being, being produced. And so, a big change. But some of that is now, of course, people like to go where the research looks like it's got a lot of possibilities for funding and for yielding results. But back before. Well, I ran, in 1965, I ran a week-long conference on stress in the performing arts here at NYU. And at that time, as long as it was for music was viewed as somehow related to the effects on stress, it was already seen as a valid pursuit aspect to go. But that was it as a therapizing element. That was already, it was accepted quite well. So there was, but and the conference was immensely successful. But the more intricate neuroscience aspects of things didn't really start with much effect until the beginning of the 2000s. But it's a roaring thing now, and it's it's so and the nature, it's perceived to be intimately related to the issue of consciousness, and it's and the notions of quantum theory, of course, are raging ones. It's the qualia are just beginning to be appreciated, even so. So it's there's just been a book that's just published
Mm-hmm.
called "Putting Ourselves Back in the equation, and its subtitle, as it was, is questions why physicists are studying human consciousness and AI to unravel the mysteries of the universe. And it's just published, and the author is George Musser, Musser,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's the publisher is Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. It's a New York City publisher, but you can just look at one. It's just out. The other book that is of great interest is called The Rigor of Angels by Michelle Edgerton, Egggerton. He's a professor at Johns Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an amazing book too. Now, to my, I don't, I mean, the music is not it is discussed in both, but it's not the major thing, but it is nevertheless in line with a understanding that our perceptions, the way our ability to attend to and measure experience is as much a part of the experience as the outside world from which it comes.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my strong sense that this attention to music is going to be increasingly important. And I will send you a link to I may have already discussed it, called the Global Oneness Summit, that is talking about the importance of music in understanding the nature of existence. When I get off the phone, I'll give you the link. Okay.
Yeah, sure. No rush with it. So I will